I'm Lena. My stepmother told my dad that his house should go to her daughter who had never paid a single bill, never shoveled the driveway, never sat in a hospital waiting room at 2 in the morning, and my dad, the man I had reorganized my entire adult life around, signed the paperwork agreeing with her. Then she texted me asking if I'd keep covering the utilities. I didn't answer that day. I didn't answer the day after either. But I want to tell you what happened between finding out and finally walking away, because it wasn't one dramatic moment. It was a slow unraveling of something I'd spent years pretending was solid. It started on a Tuesday in late October. I'd taken a half day from work to help my dad sort through the filing cabinet in his home office, the same cabinet I'd organized for him 3 years prior after his first cardiac event left him foggy and overwhelmed. He still hadn't learned the system I'd built. Folders labeled by year, insurance on the left, medical on the right, property documents in the red hanging folder at the very back. I was sitting cross-legged on the floor with a stack of papers in my lap when I found it. Not the red folder, that was still where I'd put it. It was a manila envelope slipped between the back of the drawer and the cabinet wall, like someone had tucked it there hoping the wood would swallow it whole. The return address was a law office in Naperville. The postmark was 8 weeks old. I held it for a second, turned it over. My name wasn't on it, but my dad's was, and the flap had already been opened and resealed with a strip of tape that didn't quite line up. Someone had opened it, read it, closed it, and hidden it. I pulled out the document. It was a revised property deed. My dad's house, the one he bought when I was 9, the one where I learned to drive in the driveway, the one I had been paying the property taxes on for the past 4 years, was now listed with a co-owner. Not me. His stepdaughter. My stepsister. I sat very still. The radiator in the corner clicked and hissed. Outside, a leaf blower started up somewhere down the block. I went through it twice. The deed was dated 6 weeks ago. My name appeared nowhere. There was a handwritten sticky note paper clipped to the last page in my stepmother's loopy cursive, just until she gets on her feet. You know how she is. I did know how she was. She was 28 years old and had moved back home twice. She'd had her car repossessed the previous spring, a fact I knew because my dad had quietly asked me to spot him $1,200 to cover it, money I sent without asking questions because that's what I did. I spotted him. I covered things. I drove 3 hours each way to be at his appointments. I was the one who researched home health aides when his cardiologist raised concerns last fall, who spent 4 evenings making phone calls to insurance coordinators so he wouldn't have to navigate the hold music alone. But my stepsister deserved the house. I placed the document back inside the envelope, set it on the desk, and walked downstairs. My stepmother was in the kitchen pouring herself a cup of coffee. She saw my face and her hand slowed on the carafe. I asked her to tell me about the deed. She set the mug down with a careful precision that told me she'd already rehearsed this moment. She said my stepsister was going through a hard time. She said my dad and she had talked it over and decided this was the best way to make sure their daughter felt secure. She said I was established, I had my career, I had my apartment in the city. I didn't need it the way her daughter did. I asked if my dad knew I'd been paying the property taxes. She said of course he knew, and she said it gently with a slight tilt of her head, as if that fact had no bearing whatsoever on what they'd decided. My dad walked in from the garage. He had grease on his hands from tinkering with something in there. He always had a project, and when he saw me holding the envelope, he stopped in the doorway. He didn't say anything right away. He looked at my stepmother first. That look told me everything. I asked him directly. I said, "Did you know I've been covering the property taxes every April? Did you know I paid to replace the water heater last winter? Did you know I drove here on a Wednesday in February to deal with the burst pipe under the kitchen sink because you didn't want to call a plumber at emergency rates?" He said, "Lena, we just felt like your sister needed something stable to hold on to." That word, stable. I had heard it my entire adult life, always directed at me, always used as a reason why I was the one who could handle things not getting better. You're so stable, Lena. You'll land on your feet. You always do. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I stood in that kitchen for probably 30 more seconds. Then I picked up my bag, told my dad I'd talk to him soon, and walked out to my car. I sat in the driveway for a while. The engine running. heat coming up through the vents. I stared at the garage door and thought about every time I had pulled into this driveway over the past 7 years and felt something like relief, like I was still needed here, like the fact that I kept showing up meant I was still wanted. I think I confused the two for a very long time. I drove home without calling anyone. 2 days passed, no call from my dad, no text from my stepmother, nothing. The silence was its own answer. They'd said what they needed to say with a document filed at the county clerk's office, and they were waiting for me to absorb it the way I always absorb things and just continue on. Then on Thursday morning, while I was eating breakfast before work, my stepmother texted me. It was short. She said the ComEd bill was coming up. Could I handle it this month? Things were tight. I put my phone face down on the counter and finished my coffee. That afternoon, I asked a coworker, a woman I trusted, someone who'd been through her own family estrangement, if I could talk through something. We sat in a conference room for 40 minutes after everyone else had left. I laid out the whole thing. The deed, the property taxes, the water heater, the pipe, the $1,200 for the car. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said, quietly, "So they gave her the asset and kept you as the maintenance plan." I hadn't thought of it in exactly those terms, but yes, that was it. I drove home that night with a different kind of clarity than I was used to. Not angry clarity. I've never been much of a rage person, to be honest. More like the feeling you get when you've been staring at a word for so long it stops making sense, and then suddenly it does again, just differently. I could see the whole shape of it now. The way I'd been useful rather than valued. The way my reliability in his first policy for years. The way they'd taken a deed to the house and handed it to someone else without so much as a conversation, and then texted me about the electric bill 2 days later as if those two things existed in separate universes. I did not text back about the ComEd bill. Friday night I drove up to see my dad. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. I parked on the street and walked up to the door and rang the bell because something in me didn't feel right using the garage code anymore. My stepsister answered. She was in leggings and a sweatshirt, holding a mug like she'd already settled in. She said, "Oh, hey," and opened the door. She didn't seem uncomfortable. That was the part I wasn't expecting. How entirely comfortable she seemed, standing in the doorway of a house she had never once paid a bill for. I asked if my dad was home. She said he was in the den watching the game. She stepped aside to let me in. We sat in the living room, the three of them. My dad, my stepmother, and my stepsister, who had tucked herself into the corner of the couch like she belonged there in a way I never had. And I asked my dad to walk me through the decision. Calmly, just the logic of it. He started to say something about security and family and doing what he felt was right, and my stepmother cut in and said she hoped I wasn't going to make this into something it didn't need to be, that they had thought about this very carefully, that my stepsister had been through so much this past year. And my stepsister looked at me and said softly, "I feel terrible, Lena. I really do. I didn't ask for this." I looked at her for a moment. Her eyes were wet. One small tear tracked down the left side of her face with such precision it might as well have been scheduled. I thought about how she had answered the door of that house tonight, how she had not hesitated for a single second. I said, "I know you didn't ask for it." Then I said goodnight to my dad, said it was good to see everyone, and left. My stepmother called after me saying we should talk more, but I was already on the porch, already pulling the door shut behind me. The next 10 days were quiet on the surface. Underneath them, I was moving. I started with the finances. I went through every recurring payment I had tied to that house, the property tax auto pay, the utility account where I was listed as a secondary holder, the home warranty plan I'd set up 2 winters ago after the furnace acted up. I noted them all. Then I started the process of removing my name from each one at a time. The property tax was the easiest. 1 phone call to the county assessor's office, 15 minutes. Done. The utility account took 2 calls because the first representative transferred me to the wrong department. The home warranty was the most involved. I had to send a written cancellation request and wait for confirmation. I sent it certified mail. Then the money. I did the math. Over the past 4 years, property taxes totaling just over $9,000, the water heater at $1,100, the burst pipe repair at $840, the $1,200 I'd sent my dad for my stepsister's car, plus smaller things, a new microwave, 2 grocery runs when my stepmother was sick, 1 month of lawn service when my dad's back went out in July. Just over $13,000. Paid quietly, never once framed as a loan. I wasn't calculating it for revenge. I just needed to see it in actual numbers. See it as a real thing that had happened, because there was a voice in my head, the same voice that had been telling me I was the stable one my whole life, that kept trying to reframe all of it as something I'd done voluntarily, something I'd wanted to do, and I did want to. That's the complicated part. I loved my dad, I still do, but love and exploitation can run on the same track for a very long time before you notice there's only one train. I put it all in a document, dates, amounts, descriptions, saved it in a folder on my desktop called Record. 3 weeks after I found the deed, my stepmother called me. I let it go to voicemail. She said she wanted to talk, that things had gotten tense and she hoped we could find our way back to being a family. She used the word family 3 times in a 90-second voicemail. She did not mention the property taxes. She did not mention the water heater. My dad texted me that same afternoon. He said he missed me and that he knew I was upset and that he hoped I'd come for Thanksgiving. I sat with that text for a while. There was something genuinely sad about it, not fake sad, not the strategic sadness of my stepsister's well-timed tear. Real sad. He was my dad and he missed me and he probably didn't understand, not fully, why this had hurt as much as it did because no one had ever laid it out for him plainly. He had let my stepmother manage the narrative for so long that the narrative had become real to him. I typed back, "I love you, Dad. I'm not ready to come to Thanksgiving this year." He didn't respond. My stepsister texted me a few days later. It was breezy the way her texts always were, like we were still the kind of people who could skip over hard things. She said she was thinking about repainting the upstairs hallway, and did I have the name of the guy who'd redone my apartment's trim last year? I read it twice. Then I put my phone down and went to make dinner. The next week, things shifted again. I got a call from a woman at my dad's credit union. She was calling about a savings account, one I had helped my dad open 6 years ago when he was trying to consolidate some of his accounts after my mother's life insurance came through. I had been listed on it as a joint holder, not because I needed access to it, but because at the time my dad had asked me to be, in case something happened to him and the funds needed to be moved quickly. The woman told me there had been a series of withdrawals over the past 2 months. She wanted to confirm that I had authorized them. I had not authorized anything. I drove to the branch that afternoon, sat across a desk from a manager who had that careful professional neutrality of someone delivering news they've had to deliver before. He walked me through the transaction history. Over 8 weeks, a little over $6,000 had been moved out of that account in increments, some to an account ending in numbers I didn't recognize, some to Venmo, one large transfer labeled home expenses. My hands were steady. My voice was steady. I asked him what I needed to do to remove my name from the account and have the unauthorized withdrawals formally documented. It took 2 hours. I left with my name off the account and a printed copy of the transaction record in my bag. That night I sat at my kitchen table for a long time without turning on the lights, not spiraling, just thinking about the version of this situation that my dad's family would tell if anyone asked, about how I would be the difficult one, the one who made everything complicated, the one who couldn't just be happy for her stepsister, about how my stepsister would not be called difficult for answering the door of someone else's house like she owned it, about how my stepmother would not be called anything at all. I drafted an email. I addressed it to my dad, with a copy to my stepmother. I attached the transaction record from the credit union, the property tax receipts from the past 4 years, and the record I'd kept of every other payment I could document. I did not write it in anger. I wrote it the way I write reports at work, plainly, with facts in order. I wrote, I want to make sure we're all operating with the same information. Over the past 4 years, I have contributed the following amounts toward the maintenance of the property at address. I have also recently learned that the joint savings account I held with Dad was used to make withdrawals I did not authorize. I have had my name removed from that account, and the credit union has a formal record of the unauthorized transactions. I am sharing this not as a threat but as documentation. If any of my personal financial information or resources are used without my explicit consent going forward, I will have no choice but to treat it accordingly. I hit send. My dad called 20 minutes later. I let it ring. My stepmother called immediately after. I let that ring too. An hour passed, then a text from my stepsister. Why would you do that to them? They're getting older, Lena. This is so cold, I read it. I set the phone down. I went and took a shower. The long kind, the kind where the water goes from hot to lukewarm before you realize you should get out. When I came back to the kitchen, I wrote 3 words in the Notes app on my phone. Not for anyone else. Just for me. I see you. I meant the version of myself who had wired money and driven through February snowstorms and spent Saturday mornings on hold with insurance companies and never once asked anyone to notice. The version of me who had genuinely believed for a very long time that being relied upon was the same as being loved. She deserved to be seen. Even if only by me. I blocked the credit union accounts from further access, finalized the removal of my name from all utilities, and contacted a family law attorney just to understand my options. Nothing dramatic, no lawsuits, no formal complaints filed. Just understanding. Knowing where the lines were, having someone in my corner who spoke in legal terms rather than family feelings. The attorney was matter-of-fact. She said the unauthorized withdrawals were potentially actionable, but that pursuing it would be expensive and emotionally costly, and that I should decide what resolution actually looked like for me, not what it looked like to a courtroom. To me, what it looked like to me was this. I wanted my name off of everything. I wanted a record that the money had existed and that I had contributed it. I wanted to stop. That was all. I didn't need them to apologize. I didn't need him to apologize. I didn't need anyone to announce to the family that I was right. I needed to stop being part of a system that treated my dependability as a resource to be extracted. Thanksgiving came and went. I spent it with a friend from graduate school and her husband and their 2 kids who were 4 and 7 and extremely interested in mashed potatoes. It was loud in a good way. I drove home that evening with a full stomach and no missed calls I needed to dread. In December, I saw on social media that my stepmother had posted a family photo. The caption was something about gratitude and the gift of being together. My dad and my stepsister and my stepmother stood in the living room in front of a decorated tree. The tree was in a spot where an armchair used to be. An armchair I had helped my dad move up from the basement the spring he threw his back out. The spring I spent 3 weekends going back and forth to help him reorganize the first floor. I didn't comment. I didn't share. I looked at it for a moment and then I kept scrolling. A few days before Christmas, I got a card in the mail. My dad's handwriting on the envelope, slightly shaky now, more than it used to be. Inside a card with a winter landscape on the front and 4 lines in his handwriting. I know I didn't handle things well. I'm not sure I understand all of it yet. I miss you being here. I love you, Dad. No apology exactly, no undoing of anything. But something. A hand held out in the dark, unsure if it would be taken. I put the card on my kitchen counter and looked at it for 3 days before I moved it. The house sold in February. I found out from the county property records website. I'd set up a notification out of professional habit, not expectation. The sale price came through, and I did the math on what the property taxes I'd paid had contributed to that equity. I didn't do anything with that calculation. I just let myself know. My stepsister was not in contact with me. My stepmother was not in contact with me. My dad texted occasionally, short messages, usually about the weather or something he'd seen on television, the kind of texts that don't require a hard response. I answered those. Briefly, warmly, without reopening anything. That's not forgiveness exactly. I'm not sure I'm there yet, but it's something. A door left open at a specific width, enough light to see by. These days I live alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in a city I chose for myself, with a job I'm good at and a Saturday morning routine that belongs entirely to me. I teach a budgeting workshop at the community center on the 2nd Thursday of each month, for people who are just starting to feel like they have enough ground under them to plan ahead. Last month, a woman about my age told me after the session that she'd been the family accountant for her entire extended family for 15 years, managing everyone's finances, covering shortfalls, keeping secrets. And that coming to the workshop was the first time she'd done something just for her money situation in over a decade. I told her I understood that. I meant it. I'm not going to tell you that walking away from family is easy or clean or something you do once and then it's over. It isn't. Some mornings, I still reach for my phone to call my dad before I remember that we're at a careful distance right now. and the reaching still has grief in it. That doesn't go away. But I want you to hear something. If any of this landed anywhere familiar for you, being the dependable one is not the same as being the unimportant one. Even if your family treats it that way, your steadiness is not a reason for you to be overlooked. Your capacity to handle things is not an invitation for other people to put more on you while taking more away. If you have been the one managing the paperwork and covering the shortfalls and reorganizing the cabinets and showing up in February, you are allowed to stop. Not because you stopped loving them, because you finally started making room for yourself. And if that makes you the difficult one in the story they tell, let them tell it. You'll know the version that's true. I want to hear from you. Have you ever been the stable one in a family that treated your stability like it was inexhaustible? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping yourself? Tell me in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. If this reached something in you, drop a 1 below. I read every single one. And if you're new here, welcome. This is a space for real stories told honestly. Subscribe so you're here for the next one. There's something I've been thinking about a lot since all of this settled. Not what my dad did or didn't do. Not what my stepmother calculated or my stepsister accepted without question. I've been thinking about what I kept telling myself for years. That being useful and being loved were the same thing. That if I kept showing up, kept being the one who handled it, kept being stable, eventually the people I was doing it for would see me. Not just what I could do. Me. They didn't. And I think if I'm being honest with myself, part of me knew that long before I found that deed tucked into the back of a filing cabinet. There's a thing that happens when you're reliable in a family that isn't. You become load-bearing, not in the way a person is valued, in the way a wall is. Nobody thanks the wall. Nobody asks if the wall is tired. They just keep adding weight to it, and as long as it holds, they assume it always will. What I learned the hard way is that when you finally stop holding, the people who put the weight there will blame you for what falls. Not themselves for piling it on, you for stepping back. That's not something I'm bitter about anymore. It just took me a while to understand it clearly enough to stop internalizing it as my failure. Here's what I think is actually true. Based on everything that happened with my dad and my stepmother and my stepsister, the way you treat someone's reliability reveals what you actually think of them. If you see someone consistently showing up, covering costs, driving 3 hours, staying on hold so you don't have to, and your response is to quietly transfer a house title and then text them about the electric bill, what you're saying without words is that you see their capacity and not their humanity. You've decided they exist to absorb, not to receive. That's a choice. And choices have consequences that compound quietly over time. My dad is older now. The house sold. My stepsister is somewhere else, presumably working through whatever comes next without the infrastructure of my quiet contributions underneath her. My stepmother hasn't reached out in months. The weight of a household that was built on one person's silent labor doesn't just redistribute when that person leaves. Sometimes it collapses. Not because I wanted that, because the math was always going to catch up. I didn't plan any of this as a lesson for them. I did it because I ran out of reasons not to. But I think there's something important in the way it unfolded, not as justice exactly, more like cause meeting effect in slow motion. What I want to say to you, if you're the Lena in your own story, is that your steadiness is not an obligation. Your ability to handle hard things is not an invitation for other people to stop handling them too. And the moment you stop making yourself smaller to keep someone else comfortable, you will feel the specific kind of fear that comes right before growth, the fear that you are doing something wrong, that you are being selfish, that you are breaking something precious. You are not breaking something precious. You are finally showing yourself the same care you spent years giving away to people who filed it under. That's just how she is. Knowing your own worth isn't arrogance. Documenting what you've given isn't pettiness. Removing your name from accounts that were draining you isn't cruelty. It's just intelligence catching up with kindness. Finally, after a long time running behind. I'm not done loving my dad. I don't think I ever will be. But I'm also not going back to being the wall.